So you've seen the title of the video, you've seen I've got my glasses on so I'm looking at a screen, you've seen I've got the headphones so we don't have audio crossover, and also I can't just play the entire movie with the audio obviously throughout. But I'm doing something a bit unusual. I'm not going to make you sit through the entire thing. You'll have seen the runtime of the video isn't the entire runtime of the film. I'm just going to cut to bits where I'm making a point or something I do want to bring to your attention. This is effectively a look into how I make notes. I'll watch something and sort of I'll have a notepad file that I'll jot things into. But I will basically be telling you what I'd probably be jotting down instead. So we'll cut to those bits out, like I say. But I chose the last broadcast because it's fascinating to me. The fact that the Blair Witch Project, came out about a year after, but it was so much bigger and so much more well received. The marketing for that, I think, really helped. The fact they tried to sell it as a real thing. Whilst found footage had existed before, these two really sort of shot it into the mainstream. But this was written and directed by Stefan Avalos and Lance Weiler, and it stars David Beard, Jim Seward, and those two guys, as well as a cast of others. And there is a thread here that pretty much all of the characters are named as a variation of the actual real person's name. It does happen a lot with these found footage and low budget things. But this, like I say, is fascinating. It's a look into the Jersey Devil murders. So without further ado, let's watch the last broadcast. And obviously the following people are not actors, but really they are. Like I said, people's names have been changed. David Lee, David Beard, Stephen Avcast is Stefan Avalos, Locus Wheeler is Lance Weiler. So it's all that kind of thing. And Jim Seward's name has been misspelled as S-U-E-R instead of S-E-W-A-R-D. It's a nice idea, like I say, just to make it easier for the actors. See, I like during this call that it does sound very believable. It does sound like two people having this kind of 911 call. It's quite difficult to make that realistic and believable. So I'm quite impressed with that. And this is still something that we see. We see these kind of sensational or sensationalist media kind of out there, and people don't believe it when something goes wrong. It is quite normal for that to happen. As I knock everything around me. Always hydrate. It definitely does have that feel of like a fact or fiction style TV show, like Unsolved Mysteries, that kind of thing. That cheesy kind of thing, more than like an actual documentary done by someone investigating a murder about those people. So that's a weird stylistic sort of clash in a way. It fits more what it's looking at, not what it is, if that makes sense. And to be honest, the fact that they have done it as a live broadcast themselves, like obviously in the film, in the story, is a slight reason why I've done it this way as well. To sort of do a live broadcast that's then edited after the fact. I'm gonna take that one. That wasn't entirely accidental or coincidental at all. See, a lot of even like the bit parts are well performed. When you're doing something that's a documentary style, you've got to make it seem as though it's a real person. This is what I love about Lake Mungo. They do seem like real people. And there's a few standout performances here that really make that, this landlady being one. She is believable as a landlady. She is believable as someone who knows him and is just talking about her experiences of this weird loner called Jim. So massive respect to the acting chops that everyone's displaying here. Could this be a story of the dangers of the internet? When we're talking 2 years before the turn of the millennium, it's very much in the zeitgeist, and I respect it for that. I mean, now we look at that web address, magic_tricks/junk.html. HTML. It just doesn't make sense as a web address. We know now that that's not real, but back then people weren't as savvy. That could have been a real web address. I don't remember ever seeing it and going, that's not right. I think it's fascinating that they mention, the fascination with magic, which is all about misdirection. That's what this film is. It's all about misdirection. We're setting up Jim Seward. We're looking into the Fact or Fiction crew. We're looking into that show. And that's not at all what we need to be focusing on. We should be looking at someone else entirely. But we'll get to that much later. I mean, it's quite funny, this idea of two people so opposed seem to, you know, work quite well together. You do see it a lot. Whilst we like to say birds of a feather and all that, opposites attract is also a thing we say. And I think, you know, the fact that they are reflecting that sometimes these real life pairings, you know, in media do work out better than you think, sometimes worse than you think.
Well, they tie this into the internet through IRC chat, except so people could, like, you know...
IRC chat. Is that a tautology? Internet relay chat. Never spotted that one before either. Quite ambitious, really, for the time. 'Cause now it'd be easy for a lot of people to do that, you know, sort of stream to cable access, or public access cable, and to the internet at the same time. But then the logistics involved would have been quite almost insurmountable for a lot of people. So it does say, I think, that they have a lot of awareness of what they're doing. You know, they do have a lot of skill, these people. See, again, the idea of having someone who is known for directing soap operas, for creating artificial setups and things like that, says again just how much that this is all about artifice. It's about making stuff up. It's about stuff not being real, like with the magic and the misdirect. We are given so much here that tells us what this film is really about. Making things up and misdirection. Which is entirely what David is doing in this entire documentary. Beautiful. There's almost a feeling of Jeff from Blair Witch 2 about Ryan. The fact that, you know, he's recording them outside, he's got this weird little place, you know, that kind of thing. I do get those vibes, and his style and everything like that. If the Blair Witch took inspiration, or Blair Witch Project took inspiration from this, there's no reason to believe that the sequel didn't have some inspiration also. I wouldn't put it past them. And here we see the accused for the first time. Who just seems a very quiet, nice guy. And again, this is clearly all artifice. He's done, you know, memorization of the cards. He's not reading minds or anything like that. And this is for show. So that's a well-known magic trick where you have something pre-written in some kind of oil or something on your arm and you rub ashes on it so that it sticks to that and creates that shape.
Supposed psychic fit in which numbers appeared on his arm were nothing more than simple tricks.
As David says himself in the film, of course. I love how that shot is framed to make Jim look like he's suspicious, but this is just someone who isn't super socially adept. He's a bit of an outsider, a bit of a loner, a bit of a weirdo. We already know this. So it's all, again, about setting up a particular way of looking at something or something happening, whilst the truth is vastly different. See, this is interesting as well because we're listening to the exact same recording from before, but now we have information of what we're meant to believe about Jim Seward. And all of a sudden, he sounds far too calm, he sounds far too aware of what's going on, even though apparently he's lost and, you know, can't find his friends. It paints a very different story because of the information we have. Again, it's all about setting up a particular way of looking at the information, because it's exactly the same we heard before. And that is brilliant. I think that's a very well crafted moment to give us that reinforcement, I guess, of the themes here. See, that would clearly say to me, if evidence is just sat out, either he's really stupid or didn't do anything. And for his, you know, his skill with magic and things like that, I don't think this is a stupid man. And his ability to navigate the internet back in the late 90s. This is not a stupid man. This is clearly meant to tell us, as the viewer, that this guy probably didn't actually do it. Which do kind of feel sorry for this guy who had to sit through 15 hours of just guys in the woods, just looking at things, you know. But again, this is part of the fan footage premise across the board. There's always someone who's had to pour through all this and put it together to present to us, the viewers. So it's keeping within what we'd expect within the medium. So this is where it starts to get interesting, where we start to see the actual footage that was taken, and again, how it's all framing Jim as the perpetrator of these awful acts. But really, he's just trying to make sure he's giving them what he's promised them, which is apparently a psychic leading them to a place where they're going to experience whatever they're out there to experience. Very different to, like I say, what is being pushed to, you know, to us and to the prosecution and to the jury. See, again, this is framing it as all these lines that he's saying, like, we're heading in the right direction, we're going to settle this. Saying that all of these things are him premeditating these murders. But again, these, you know, TV psychics, if you will, as we see a lot now in sort of the Ghost Hunters style things, they are meant to sell the fact that, you know, they've got some kind of spirit guide or some inclination, like gut instincts that, you know, like heightened up to 11. You know, we have these things. We know that these charlatans lean on this over-dramatic way of selling what they're doing, because that's what people are expecting. They're expecting this confidence, this, I know exactly what we need to do. So really, he's just giving them what they want. And again, it's all about framing it so he sounds like the bad guy. See, a lot of this now is just going to be their footage. So we're going to see a lot of this set up for ourselves, but we've been primed that Seward is the bad guy, he's leading them to their deaths, and he's planned it. We've been given that information up front, same as the prosecution and the jury would have had. The case has been made that Seward clearly did this. So we're in that same boat as those jurors, and we're going to draw the same conclusions, in theory. Unless, of course, you know, we've seen it before, or we're savvy to what's going on here. More likely the former than the latter. See, that moment apparently being a linchpin of the case that, you know, he's gone off on Ryan. Ryan was goading him, you know, saying he was psychic or psycho. He's out there in the cold, he's trying to sell this story and he wants to be believed, and someone's trying to disprove him or discredit him. I don't think he was wrong to react in anger. It's a perfectly normal response. So the surveillance camera over them is, or has become, I guess, one of those tropes. You know, there's always like a camera that's watching everything at all times because of X, Y, or Z reason that they insert into the plot to make it make sense. So, at least with this, having a lot of cameras on them does make a lot of sense because of what they're doing, and I suppose a surveillance camera for the live broadcast does kind of work. If there's nothing really going on, they can just default to showing that feed. I can understand it, but again, it does feel a lot like a trope that maybe this started in the, you know, in the genre. That always confuses me, the idea of consecutive life sentences. You have one life. You know, I know life sentences tend to carry a numerical value that's, you know, varying between different jurisdictions, but the idea of it actually being called life is really weird when you can have multiples. But that's a legal issue. It's not an issue with the film. That's a real life thing. So I do think this guy's wrong. You know, with the idea that you can't have blood from a murder scene without being the murderer. If all these guys are in the woods and someone murders those guys near him and maybe takes his shirt to incriminate him, the evidence is there, but he didn't do the murders. So I think it's very reductive reasoning. Whilst I don't, you know, I agree that it's not circumstantial like the previous guy said, it's not necessarily the smoking gun. Unless you've got his prints on a murder weapon, you know, it could all theoretically come from some other avenue. The fact of the matter, they knew these four guys entered the woods and only one returned, doesn't preclude the idea that someone else could have entered those woods as well. When the surveillance camera shut off after 2 hours, would have been a perfect opportunity. See, that's an important point that's made there. On the shirt, you've just got these spatters every so often. That's not arterial spray, you know, that's not even like hacking kind of, you know, sort of splatters that you'll get. These are very tiny amounts just scattered around. So how could it have just got on those little areas? Why wouldn't it be completely soaked in the blood of 3 different men? And this is a good case against Jim Seward being the murderer. See, once he'd done his job of leading them to where they needed to apparently be to get the Jersey Devil on tape and whatever, he was on IRC. And if there was no real gap, that would be open and shut case. However, yes, as this guy just says, there's a 45-minute gap in the chat logs. So that's enough time to kill these guys if he knew what he was doing and he was efficient. I do concede that point. The question then becomes, was there any blood or anything on the computer when he came back to it? Because if there wasn't, then he wouldn't have had blood on his hands. And if there was no evidence that he'd wiped it all off, again, it just sells the case that it possibly wasn't Jim. Of course, the guy working for law enforcement is going to say that law enforcement is never pushed to a conclusion by the media. We know through various, you know, released documents and leaked documents that sometimes the closure of a case is more important to people who want to be re-elected as judges or whatever than actually getting the right guy and completing a thorough investigation. Yes, there are police officers who will rail against that, but they will often be moved off the case. So again, it's that whole thing of you've got to look at who's giving you the information. Where is this evidence coming from? In his case, he's going to back up law enforcement above anything else. He's going to claim that they've done the best they can with the case, because that's what he's meant to do. But like I say, I don't always trust the source with the information. See, to me, isn't that an obstruction of justice? Unless you're in a state with double jeopardy laws. But even then, you've got to, I think, at least entertain the idea that law enforcement should be aware of any new possible evidence in a case. So I do think this is very much a wrong move, taking David at his word that he's just making a documentary about this and received this footage from somewhere completely unknown. As we learn, not necessarily the case. See, she's basically a forensic wizard when it comes to the tapes here. But of course, this is what gives us our main thrust towards the end as well. I almost want to believe that David didn't think that all this footage could be recovered. The bits that were severely distorted and, you know, seemingly unrecoverable, I think he really thought that there was a slim to none chance. But as we see at the end, she did a lot better than he gave her credit for. Or maybe he did believe that she could do it and just wanted to, you know, sort of get another one, another notch on his belt, if you will. I don't know. I that's one of those that could go either way. Maybe it's an experiment in knowing how badly a tape can be mangled and still be recovered. Because he seems like someone who is very curious and likes to ask questions and figure things out. See, it is interesting how we see what, you know, Ryan really thinks. He actually thought he was quite chill. So I think the goading was almost a way of saying, how far can I push this guy? And he was obviously surprised by the result of that. So I love the fact that, you know, Shelley has found that information out. She's got this bit of footage that proves that Jim is seemingly innocent. They are alive at the time that they are supposed to have been killed if Jim did it. So now it does raise the question of, if not Jim, who? This is where we're getting into the end game, if you will. You know, Shelley's got to the point where she can possibly get these last few frames to hopefully identify who killed these guys. And it's literally 3 frames that make the difference. See, now we've kind of almost exonerated Jim. The question then becomes of, what about Stephen? Or Johnny Love? So we could be leaning on the fact that in fact it's a supernatural entity like the Jersey Devil. It's basically Occam's razor. When you rule out everything else, the impossible, then whatever's left must be possible. It's like even today, you know, we can put ourselves as whoever we want to be online, but it doesn't mean that that's who we are. There was an episode of Buffy where, you know, they say, I could be in the elderly Dutch grandmother chat room, but I'm not an elderly Dutch grandmother. I'm just saying I am online, which again feeds into the idea of the film here. It's all about misdirection and making up things. This is all about fiction and misdirection. I guess that's part of the beauty of our modern era. We do have IP tracking and things like that that's a lot easier to do. Back then, it wasn't so common and so simple. And of course, you know, now we've got Tor routing and VPNs and things, so those can add a block to it, which if someone wanted to do something like this, they would probably use those technologies. But it is something that's interesting, that, you know, that's different about the world today to then. So that's another slightly annoying factor. They didn't keep the logs or anything like that, because that would have been potentially a way of helping. But without logs being kept, there is pretty much no way of resolving this through the IRC side of things. We don't know who sent that message, and never will. Well, we will, but at least at this point in time, it didn't look that way. I must admit, whilst a lot of the acting is great in this, that every time I see it, it does seem very fake and false, unfortunately. I love that moment that Claire's calling him out there. He's saying, you as a documentarian are making the story you want to sell. You know, whilst his court documents are meant to be as close to the truth as possible, you have got an agenda, surely, that you're trying to push there. Like every film, there is an agenda, there is a message. And I like the fact that he's calling him out. It's brilliant. It's a great moment in this film. It's very interesting how that again is something that still exists today. Bad things happen and people profit of it. Either those directly involved, or, you know, those who want to sell the story, or in most cases both. And that's a very uncomfortable truth to have to face.
This is one of the stops that the guys have made on their way to the Pine Barrens. I know this because of the extensive documentary footage that they'd taken of this place.
Is that really why you know it, David? So the fact we had a little brief bit of that earlier as well. So we're already slightly aware of it, even if we didn't realise it. You know, it was partway through earlier that we saw it, and it was just a moment. But now we are piecing it all together. We're coming towards the end point, to the conclusion, to the realisation that we have been lied to throughout this piece. So this is where the artifice seeps in, you know, the framed as a normal film, that weird moment where he just appears behind her. This is where a lot of people felt that it went a bit off the rails, and I'd agree. I like the idea that we get this revelation, but I think how they handled it was terrible. We could have just seen him put the camera down on the side and this be filmed. That would have been perfectly fine. But instead we got this thing. I mean, I guess it again fits into the theme of the film. You know, the artifice is now lifted, but technically the artifice is still there. I love the fact that they held the shot so long on David over Shelley's body. It was a nice stylistic choice to me. I like the fact that there's like a frustration, but also like a detachment. You know, he's at the same time kind of like, oh, I thought I'd actually finished you off, to, well, come on, get on with it, you know, let's have this done with. But yeah, this section of the film, to me, lacks a lot of the impact, because we are living in an artificial world now. Like I said before, the veil being lifted, if you will, on all the artifice that had come before, actually puts us into more artifice, and that's something I respect if I don't agree with. But we're also given that revelation that some of those scenes we had before, of him saying, like, you know, I'm sort of following the journey of the guys and stuff like that, they were done out of sequence. This is why he seemed a bit stranger in those moments, and as we'll see in a short while, the bit in the woods when he looks to the side is because he's got Shelley's body with him. So it's fascinating how, again, that artificial thing of we're given one sequence of events, but actually the sequence isn't quite as we've been told it is. I know this torturous feeling of trying to get a take right so many times that the light goes on you. I've done that far too often. So yeah, there we go. The last broadcast, my thoughts on it, and the fact that, like I say, it's very much a sort of breakdown of the artifice of filmmaking and, you know, the misdirection of magic. It's basically, it tells you everything that it is throughout the production. It guides you down one particular path that is in fact not the truth. And like I say, the ending notwithstanding, you know, I do love this film for the most part. I just think that the ending could have been done better. We could have kept it in universe. We could have still been following his camera. It would have been perfectly fine and acceptable, and like I say, maybe slightly better. But this was a fun, I'll take these off now. This was a fun little experiment for me to do. It was something just to, let's transition. So yeah, it was a fun little thing for me to do as a different way of doing a video for you, and hopefully it's all worked nicely together and come together in a cohesive format, and you can understand my process a lot better. And if you want more of this stuff, please do let me know. I'm happy to do more in the future. And if you want me to do any live ones, I can do those as well if you want that. So let me know what you like. I'll hopefully get round to it. But that's my thoughts and my take on the last broadcast, a film about Artifice and Misdirection. So thank you very much for joining me on this journey. Next time I'll do something that doesn't require me sitting there with a camera on me for an hour and a half. But until then, as always, thank you for watching and take care.